30 Minutes with Ron.
Hello, and welcome to 30 Minutes with Ron. I'm your host, James W. Hawk. Have no fear, Ron is here. Tonight's guest is Ron Gagliardi. Ron is going to introduce us to a person that was very influential in his time, and when Ron first told me about it, I had never even heard of the guy. So Ron, when did you first become aware of Thomas Nast?
Well, my chosen occupation was that of art teacher, but I used to check out all kinds of cartoonists, from the older ones all the way to the present cartoonists. And I saw this guy Nast, and I saw his work, and I said, wow, this guy's pretty interesting. I better check out what he's doing, or what he did, because he was dead by the time I decided to check out what he was doing. And it turns out that he was one of the most powerful men in the United States for the time in the maybe 1860s to 1880s, somewhere in there. And he had many, many followers because he ended up at the Harper's Weekly magazine, which basically was a newspaper, but they called it a magazine. And Thomas Nast was a cartoonist for them. And it turns out that he had this great way of illustrating what was going on at the time. And he became very popular for that.
Where was he from?
Well, he was born in Landau, Germany, which I'm sure I'm mispronouncing. Let me try the German way. Landau, Germany.
Right.
And he came to the United States when he was 6 years old. He was born in 1840. Came to the United States with his family when he was
born
6.
In...
Landau, Germany.
But when was he born?
1840.
1840, okay.
Yeah. Came to the United States. They settled in New York. And he became interested in cartooning at a young age, in art, and he took some courses, and he ended up working at a couple of magazines before he got to Harper's Weekly. And he was there for, I don't know, a couple of decades, doing great stuff.
So what made him so influential?
Well,
I mean, what did he do?
Just like Norman Rockwell was on the cover of magazines, and everyone saw his work first, he got to do covers of Harper's Weekly. And so on the full page, which is like about this big, he showed something that was going on in politics or in the wars that were going on, and he did it in a way that people were interested, because cartoons at the time were kind of new, and they weren't cartoony cartoons. You'll see some in a few minutes, and people liked what he did.
They didn't have the internet or the TV at the time, right?
Nope.
So cartoon was the picture of the day.
That was the big deal.
Yeah.
Yes.
When you said politics, was there anything that he did that was like outstanding that he accomplished that you could tell us about?
Well, there's two things that come to mind. In New York, there was a democratically ruled regime, and it was called Tammany Hall, and it was run by someone named Boss Tweed. And we always say Boss Tweed. I don't even know what his real name was, but everybody called him Boss Tweed. And Boss Tweed was very corrupt. And so Thomas Nast took this on as a quest, and he decided that he was going to bring down Tammany Hall and Boss Tweed. So he did a series of cartoons pointing out the horrible things that were going on in Tammany Hall. And he got so under the skin of Boss Tweed that they offered him a bribe. I believe the first bribe was something like with the equivalent of $500,000 today.
Wow.
And so Nast was pretty shrewd, and he said, well, if they're offering me $500,000, maybe I'll just ask for more. So he asked for the equivalent, I think, of $1 million, somewhere in that vicinity. And they said, okay, if you'll stop doing the cartoons, we'll give you that. And he said, no, I'm not going to stop. So eventually, that brought Boss Tweed down.
Yeah.
All of his cartoons.
You said there was another one? There were two things?
Yes. It turns out that he was active in promoting the campaigns for president of U.S. Grant and Abraham Lincoln. And they both have said, in their quotes, that it was if it weren't for his cartoons, they would have had a much more difficult time becoming president. So they attributed part of their success in becoming president to Thomas Nast's cartoons.
Do you have any samples of his work?
Well, first of all, there's Thomas Nast.
Ah.
And he was a pretty striking looking person.
Could you tell us the story about what his involvement was with Santa Claus and What else was there? Was
Uncle Sam,
and Uncle Sam and the donkey of the Democrats.
and the Republican elephant.
Can you tell us about that?
I will be happy to do so.
Good.
We even have some of his goodies right here with these. First of all, here is the donkey, and it turns out that the donkey was used during the campaign. I think it was Jackson, and so he used the donkey himself, Jackson, but then Nast decided, I'm going to take that and make that a symbol for the Democrats. And so that did become the symbol. A lot of people think, well, he created it. He did not. He took it over from Jackson, and then it kind of got ascribed to him. Then he actually did create the Republican elephant as their symbol. And I remember reading somewhere that it wasn't chosen because it was the best animal to be symbolized by, because it was ponderous and it wasn't such a fast animal. So the Republicans should have been a little upset by this, but they have taken it on and it is now recognized as their symbol. Also, there was the guy, Uncle Sam, there it is, Uncle Sam. He did not create Uncle Sam, but he took Uncle Sam, who existed, and made his symbol, he made that symbol his own. He did it a little differently, and that became the one that everyone knew about. Also, there were lots of Santa Claus people at the time, different versions of Santa Claus. And Nast's version of Santa Claus became the one that everyone remembers. And I have it right here. I'm holding it up now. So as you can tell, there's the Santa with the red coat and the white ermine and the hat, and he became the Santa that everyone knows. So that's pretty good. I mean, he became pretty popular for those kinds of things that he created and took over.
Can you show us some of the works?
Well, let's see here. We saw the elephant. We saw the donkey. Oh, here's one. This is Ulysses S. Grant in one of the cartoons that Nast did that Grant said was helpful in getting him to become president. And this is also President Grant. He's the guy over here on the left. And while I'm showing things, this is Thomas Nast. He was excellent at what's called caricatures. It's when you take a person and turn that person into a cartoon. And his were kind of realistic. I don't know if you can see a difference, what he looked like to the cartoon, but it was close.
His work is very nice.
It is.
I can't even imagine how long it would take to do something like that with the ink and pen
Oh,
thing.
yeah.
Unbelievable.
No computers.
No.
By the way, I did mention Boss Tweed, and he was not very polite to Boss Tweed. This is Boss Tweed right over here, and he has Boss Tweed not looking so good. I'm sure if I were Boss Tweed, I wouldn't have been happy with how he portrayed me either.
You have some involvement in finding an undiscovered or unknown or...
Yes, I can tell you about that.
Yes.
I actually have it here.
Good.
Okay, I have a friend. His name is Roger Straub. We used to teach together in Wallingford. And one day I went over to his house, and he said, Ron, I found this interesting cartoon in my closet. It used to belong to my mom. I think she had picked it up on some kind of trip she was on. And it turns out to have been an original Thomas Nast. And I said, Roger, this is a cool thing. There's probably not a whole lot of original Thomas Nasts out there available to people. So we decided to find out what we could about this particular cartoon. I'll hold it up now. This is called The Lion Tamed. And there's a bunch of things in the cartoon that I can try to point out to you, but maybe a little bit later. I just wanted to show you the original. And we found that there was a group called the Nast Society, and they were located in Morristown, New Jersey, which was Nast's hometown. And they were at the Morristown Library. That's where their base was. So we called them up, and we said, you know, we have this Thomas Nast cartoon. It's an original. We haven't seen it any other place in the books by Thomas Nast or about Thomas Nast. Can you tell us anything about it? So we sent them a photocopy, and they got back to us, and they said, you are very lucky people. The owner of that cartoon is really lucky because it is an unknown, unpublished Thomas Nast cartoon. And there are not many of those still coming to light.
I'll be.
So they said, this is a valuable cartoon. You should keep it under wraps or keep it in a safe place when you bring it out to let the world know. As a matter of fact, they told us that there are people around the world who collect Thomas Nast cartoons. And they said that when you let the world know about this, that like the New York Times art section would love to know and debut it. And so we thought, wow, that's pretty cool. So we decided to debut it in Cheshire, and we debuted it at a place called the Voice of Art Gallery, owned by Hannah Jung. And we thought, well, we'll call them in advance and let them know that this is happening. And so we did, except you can't call the New York Times. I tried to get through, tried to leave messages. I'm glad it wasn't a really important story because
Right.
it would never have seen the light of day.
Yeah.
But we did brochure, we put it in a magazine. This is Cheshire Magazine, and I will open it up to the page. This was the article that we published about Thomas Nast in the magazine. So this is the first magazine to have any information about Thomas Nast, about this particular cartoon. But there's an interesting story about this cartoon. So Roger tried to keep this in safe places in his house, and it wasn't framed at the time. So he has a 2-story house, and this was in the wintertime that this happened. He thought he'd pick a really good safe spot for it. He put it on top of where his computer was. There was an ice storm, and there was an ice dam on his roof. And there was a leak from the ice dam. And the only place in the entire house
no.
where the leak landed and did any damage was on the original Lion Tamed cartoon. So when that happened, it had like it stained the whole thing, got the whole thing wet except for a little part of it. So when you looked at it, there was like this dark brown stain through most of the cartoon. So we thought, well, that's not good, and that's not good to debut it that way. I actually did want to debut it that way. I thought that was kind of interesting, but Roger said, no, I'll pay to have it conserved, and he found someone who could do it, and they got rid of the stain, and then we had it framed, and we put it on the display at the art gallery framed.
Nice.
But I felt a little bad because here Roger had this great original Nast, and I didn't have any original Nast. I had a bunch of the ones that I showed that from the covers of the Harper's Weekly because I was going around buying them. By the way, you can get them on eBay too. There's a whole bunch of them on eBay. So I thought, boy, I wish I could own an original Nast cartoon. So I thought, well, let me go on eBay and see if there's any hanging around. So I went on eBay, and there was one, an original, of Thomas Nast standing in front of an easel, and there was a canvas on the easel. He was holding a palette, and with a brush, he was writing his name. And so I thought, wow, that's interesting. And I looked at the price, and I was kind of dismayed because the price was $600.
Oh.
I didn't have $600 at the time, but I thought I've got to get this. And I didn't want to let the bidding start because who knows how far up it could have gone. So I put in, I buy it now, $600, and I paid through a charge card or something, and I ended up owning that. And, drum roll please, I happen to have it right here.
There it is.
Now, I talked to the folks at the Nast Society about this, and they said that this was not as uncommon as the Lion Tamed. Apparently, if someone asked for an autograph from Nast, he would sometimes take the time to do this and give them one. So this was his standard way of putting together an autograph. And when I thought about it, I said, wait a minute. If you bumped into Thomas Nast at a conference or something, they didn't have ballpoint pens in those days. They had quill pens and ink. So he must have had to go back to his studio and do this. And you can tell that this is done by ink because he folded over part of it before it dried. And there's a transfer of one part of his name someplace over in this thing. So this is Nast's caricature of himself drawing his autograph.
His autograph.
Yeah.
So how did you encounter the Nast thing in the first place? I mean, what happened to move you in this direction?
Well, Roger's owning of the original was the main impetus for this.
So you saw Roger's original, and
Right.
then you did some research on this man,
Right.
and it grew from there.
And we were trying to turn this into a money-making item. We were going to do a poster of him and Santa Claus and the donkey and the elephant and all the wonderful things that he did. And we thought, oh, thousands of these would just go flying off the shelf. Took us about 5 years to finally get done with the design. And then we had one of them as a model to print up. And then we decided, nah, let's not do that. Let's just show it to the world and see what happens.
So what happened to Nast?
Well,
I mean, he was
very popular, very wealthy, and he had invested his money into some kind of a thing that went under.
banking, some sort of fraud.
One of
thing.
those fraudulent things.
Yeah.
And so he became very poor. And he wasn't able to get a job. He was not doing many cartoons anymore. So he ended up being nominated to be the ambassador to Ecuador. And he accepted it because there was some pay involved with it. But he didn't want to bring his wife down to Ecuador because he was afraid of yellow fever because of the mosquitoes down there. And so guess what? Thomas Nast was bitten by a mosquito, came down with yellow fever, and died in Ecuador in 1902. And I know the name of the city that he died in, but I'm sure I'm going to pronounce it incorrectly, but it's Guayaquil or Guayaquil, something like that. So he left the world in 1902. Interestingly, there was a set of postcards done by Thomas Nast. I didn't know this until we tried to do the debut of the Lion Tamed. And do I have them? Ah, here they are, right on top. Yes.
Of course.
Okay, so I looked on eBay. What a place to find things. Looked on eBay again, and I found these 3 postcards that Thomas Nast had drawn. And as I looked more carefully into them, they were copyrighted in 1905.
Oh.
And he was 3 years dead.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
Yeah. How do you do that?
I'm assuming that someone had maybe purchased the postcards or the artwork and then decided to make them into postcards. Or maybe they had the approval of the family. I never got to research it completely. But I thought, well, here's something cool. Postcards by Thomas Nast. Yeah.
Do you have any idea what he might have... I don't have the answer to the question.
All right.
But do you have any idea what he might have been doing during the Civil War? I mean, with this talent and that thing going on?
I know he did cartoons about what was going on. And I think in his earlier years, he covered some wars in different countries. He was paid to be like a correspondent.
Uh-huh.
And instead of being on video, he would draw the scenes of the battles, and he would somehow send them back to New York, and then they would print them in Harper's Weekly or whatever thing he was working for. Now, I should mention something about this wonderful cartoon over here. For years, we were trying to figure out what this meant. Now, if you, I don't know how closely you can look at this thing, but there's a fence in back of a lion. And through the fence, there's a woman's hand. You can tell it's very dainty, and there's a bracelet on it. And the hand is stroking the mane of the lion. And in the foreground, there's a broken sword and a broken jawbone and a crown. Okay, so now if you look closely at the lion's face, it ain't no lion's face. It's a human face.
Yep.
And it turns out that that's a self-caricature of Nast himself. Now, I believe that, I'm not looking at the date on here, but I think it's 1887. So this was when he was in his decline. He was no longer as influential as a cartoonist. So we think he's referring to himself as the lion, and he's been tamed by time, by people ignoring him, whatever happened. So that's what we think about the title of The Lion Tamed.
You know, it occurs to me that this guy is like, he's the dog at the throat of the victim, and his name is Nast.
Yep.
Is there any relationship with Nast and Nasty?
Yes, that's people tend to think that there was a relationship, but from what I read, there was no relationship.
None.
Nasty came, I actually did some research on nasty. I think it came from a French word.
Okay.
Yeah.
What a shame.
What a shame, yes.
Would have been perfect for him.
Darn, yes.
What are you going to do what are your future plans for all this?
Well, it would be nice to monetize this in some way. We never did the poster. We don't want to sell the originals. We did have some prints made of them, And when we had the opening at the gallery, a couple of people bought some of the prints, but it's not going to give savings for the rest of our lives here. So I thought maybe I could do some presentations to historical societies or history classes. So I belong to a group in, actually we're based in Prospect now. It's called the Greater Naugatuck Valley History Consortium. And it's composed of 7 or 8 historical societies with members who come to the meetings and discuss things and tell what we're each doing. So I asked them if they would like a presentation about Thomas Nast, and they said yes, especially since it was free. That was something that they like. So I gave about a half-hour presentation in Prospect a couple of weeks ago. And from what I hear from the response, they seem to enjoy it. One of the historical societies, I think it's in Harwinton, has said that they want to have me come and talk. So we can just send out some kind of an email or a letter to libraries and historical societies and say, hey, there's this guy with all this wonderful Thomas Nast goodies, and he talks and he talks and he talks. Ask my wife. He talks and he talks and he talks. I gave myself a nickname. I call myself Drag on Ron because I tend to. So yeah, so that's what I'll be doing. I'll be dragging on Ron and talking about Nast if anybody wants me.
When I was doing a little research on the background here, I found that they refer to him as the father of the American cartoon.
Yes.
So he was really a superstar in his time.
He was really something else. He was the Stan Lee of that era.
There you go.
Although
yeah.
Stan Lee didn't actually draw the cartoons from what I know.
Yeah.
What I think, rather.
And thank you for telling us this really interesting story about this man was like at the peak of society, being well known and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
And yet nobody knows about him today.
I know.
And it's interesting because the media is print, which, print isn't that well received these days.
Right.
It's now the internet and the movies, TV and the like. But anyway, it's an interesting story. Really appreciate it. And I'm glad that you took your time to tell us about this. And I'm glad that you took your time to come and watch this. I want to remind you that these shows, all of Ron's shows, are on YouTube. You can find them by searching 30 Minutes with Ron. I hope that you learned something. I hope you had a good time, and have a sparkling evening. Thank you and good night.